So we were discussing the selected artifact and the chosen artifact for the third PLO. Both artifacts provide great examples of research-informed practice and practice-informed research. I did note in my reflection that the first artifact was lacking in details on how the findings could be implemented in the field. And that's kind of a reoccurring theme for me, is what I've realized is that I'm not sure if I just have a hard time um, writing about it, or if maybe at the time of some of these artifacts, I didn't truly know how to implement um, some research. So that might come up again. Okay, our fourth PLO takes us to students will demonstrate effective and culturally relevant engagement skills with individuals, families, groups, organizations, and communities. The first artifact is this link is my presentation on a client from my generalist practicum year. So my second artifact, selected artifact, is a case vignette of a interracial couple. The male was um, Latino and the female was Japanese, and they're struggling to conceive. Um, so both of these artifacts provide strong examples of how cultural sensitivity can be practiced when engaging with clients. Um, like this one, I know in this artifact, I go into pretty great detail about like the Latino cultural beliefs and how that could be playing a role in um, Joe's like lack of or defensiveness, I guess, or lack of willingness to discuss his role in fertility at all. Um, so one thing that I could have included a bit more is how a clinician or social worker could tailor these modalities and therapeutic strategies to the specific clients, like based on their identity or culture. The fifth program learning outcomes. Students will demonstrate effective and ethical assessment skills with individuals, families, groups, organizations, and communities. So the first artifact discusses the various assessments used by the agency where my first placement was, which was in a Head Start. Um, and it's very, very thorough, but what I wrote about was, or what I talked about in the presentation was how the Head Start and the agency that ran the Head Start, when you took on a client, like a student, and you met with their parent or their caregiver, the biopsychosocial assessment had to be completed within that first session. So, you like, and that first session wasn't supposed to be over, I think like 50 minutes. And this assessment was so detailed and very, very detailed. And I found a lot of the parents um, like blatantly saying like this is like annoying. I don't want to answer this. Like this is like too much. Like I don't have time for this. And I completely like empathized with them. I thought that it was really, really in depth for like it would go into detail on like the mother's pregnancy with the child, which is it's important, but I just didn't feel like it was the right timing. Like if it just wasn't a very therapeutic beginning. it was almost like medical and like very, let's collect all the history we can. And there was also an issue with so in order for their child to receive services, they had to sign off on a release of information with like the child's pediatrician. And that was also like a huge, I don't want to say barrier, but pausing moment for parents of like, why? Why do you need this? Especially the first time meeting them. And when I asked for, some advice on how to handle that like moment of pause with the parents, I was just told like it's just part of the policy and you can tell the parents that, which I think just frustrated them more, like hearing that there's no good reason. Um, so that was discussed a bit in this presentation, and I know it will come up again in other artifacts. Um, my second artifact was the use of classroom observations. So yeah, so we would use in the school in the elementary school during my second year placement, we did a lot of classroom observations, which I think are helpful and great. Um, the some of the techniques that were used were like momentary time sampling and frequency recording. So how often is the child doing that behavior and when is it coming up? And this was basically to see, for the IEP, the individualized education plan or the 504 plan, how was their anxiety affecting them in the classroom? How was their learning disabilities? Um, how are they doing in the classroom? And what I talk about in the reflection here is, yes. So I talked about the use of same gender comparisons. I had never really heard of this until this past year, and I thought it was very odd. And it's not something that I took part in myself, and it's not something that I don't think I'll take part in my career. Um, so what they would do is, say you're going in to observe a male student in the fourth grade, you would then pick another male student in that class. And when you're doing those like behavior trackings, or so you would be noting what the identified student is doing, and then what the same gender peer is doing at that same time. So it's really basically comparing one student to another, and I found it odd that that was seen as valid, because we have no idea what's going on with the other student. And I found it odd to use an observation like that in conversation with the parent. If I were a parent, I would not want my child to be compared to, or like if you're comparing them, I don't want to hear it. I just found it very odd and not valid. Um, yeah, all right. PL06 is students will critically analyze and effectively choose intervention strategies with individuals, families, groups, organizations, and communities. The first artifact is a paper from the course Advanced Practice with Children, Adolescents, and Adults. Um, this paper, this paper was written about a student that I worked with at my most recent placement in the elementary school, and I talked about Axe Line's theories, so his idea of respect for the child, as well as Winnicott's holding environment, and I discussed some psychodynamic approaches, and I paid attention to behavior patterns and any peer relationship patterns or at-home relationship patterns that I could um, analyzed. So I think I did a nice job of analyzing this case. It was tough because we had no information from home. Dad was not very receptive to talking with us, and this student I'll mention again later, they actually lost their mother to gun violence in the home. So there was a lot of trauma there with not a lot of information other than the big traumatic event. Um, the second artifact is my work with a student who had a lot of issues with noise sensitivity, especially if the noise was like unpredictable, even when it was predictable with fire alarms and like what if we had a fire drill and he knew it was coming, it would still be an issue. So um, we had the noise reduction headphones. We did some PMR, some progressive muscle relaxation. We did social stories to kind of normalize it and introduce a lot of problem solving. I found that both of these artifacts provided strong examples of selecting interventions that align with the client's social emotional goals or needs. Yellow 7, students will effectively and ethically evaluate practice with individuals, families, groups, organizations, and communities. So the first artifact is my case conceptualization from this past fall, where I discussed the student that I just mentioned with the gun violence history. So this was actually my favorite presentation, and um, my work with the student felt very productive, but at the same time, I felt really restricted by the scope of my role. Um, so I struggled with that because he was very expressive, and I felt like in 20 minutes, in a 20 to 15-minute session, we couldn't get anywhere or couldn't do things the way that I saw fit or would have worked more to his advantage. It was really hard to transition back to the classroom after he um, would talk about anything, but then if we didn't talk about anything, it was like, we both know we need to talk about it, and it just was really tough for me because it's not the role of a school social worker was not, I guess, what I thought it would be, in that it wasn't therapy, it wasn't providing, 50-minute sessions or even play therapy, but I did end up really enjoying it and learning a lot, but it was difficult at first. The second artifact is information regarding the PLAF. So the present level of academic achievement and functional performance. So this is an assessment um, that or an evaluation. So the multidisciplinary team meets with the parent and they go over the strengths and all of the scores from any standardized test and any parent and teacher concerns. And this is kind of like the starting of an IEP. And when I'm saying multidisciplinary team, I'm referring to like the school's speech language pathologist, the school's occupational therapist, the school's psychologist, and the school's social worker and the classroom teacher. Uh, so I think that both of these are perfectly ethical. Like this, the with the and the other PLO with the same gender peer comparison, I would say that that wasn't very ethical, and I did question it. Whereas I think that my work in both of these artifacts are very ethical. PLO 8, Students will demonstrate the ability to analyze, formulate, implement, and evaluate policies aimed at addressing social issues. Unfortunately, I feel as if I wish I had more experience with policies, but I don't want to discredit myself too much because I did get very interested and I learned a lot about the special ed policies in place, like by the state. So the first artifact is a presentation from the class, the systems change course, and I analyze the issue of I analyze the issue of in Head Starts the lack of support in the classrooms, like the student to teacher ratio, and how early intervention can be so beneficial, yet so many parents are very against intervention and against diagnosis, and just the push and pull between understanding their fears, but also knowing, I guess not knowing, but believing that early intervention was or could be beneficial to their child. Um, so I guess the policy that was examined in the first artifact would be the student to teacher ratio in the Head Start room and their way of um, dictating who receives more help in which classroom based upon student needs, but how are student needs reported? The second artifact is the Michigan Department of Education policy for the use of seclusion and or restraints in the classroom. So yes, it's unfortunate, but at times seclusion or restraints are used to keep the students safe. I think the biggest thing here is like prevention. Like we don't want to get to the point of having to use these, but unfortunately it can happen and it does happen. So being very informed on what is okay and what is not. Um, and I wrote in my reflection about wanting to create some sort of training. They have like nonviolent crisis prevention intervention training that they provide for the teachers, but I think it would be a good idea to have like supplemental training for specifically special ed teachers, um, and all teachers, because one of the things in the policy is that um, at a certain point, a rotation of staff will be done. So if um, we're having a period of behaviors and seclusion or restraints are used, the staff that was originally there will be replaced with some new staff to kind of bring in fresh energy and allow the other staff members to rejuvenate. So I think that all school staff should be trained on it because they could be involved even if they don't have children in their room that might require it. 9 PLO 9, students will demonstrate ethical and professional behavior. So the first artifact is an ethics case review where I had to discuss and decide upon a decision. So the case was a teen who was using drugs, who I had uh, good rapport with, and the decision was, do I rupture that relationship with the client and disclose the drug use to the parent, or do I not? And when I was reading this back, I was so shocked by all of the back and forth that I went through in the paper of trying to decide when now I know absolutely like the safety of the client comes first. It's actually crazy that I don't think I ever questioned the safety coming first. I think that I just didn't know how to accept the fact that there will be many ruptures in therapeutic relationships, and that's part of protecting the clients. Um, so I think that it's a good example of ethical decisions, but it took me a while to get there in the paper, and I can see where I've grown um, in making those decisions. The second artifact is a document of notes from an IEP meeting with a student who was homeschooled and she was receiving services through the district. So if your child is homeschooled, um, you can have them, you're still entitled um, to have them evaluated by the public school district for things like a speech language disorder or learning disorder or learning disability. So they were receiving services, speech, social work, occupational therapy, and they had been administered like standardized tests for academics, and their scores were reflecting that they were several years behind academically, and it was difficult, but at the end of the day, you have to believe that the parents are doing what's in the best interest of the child, and that's their culture and that's their belief system, and it's not our place, even with those scores, to put our opinion onto them. And um, like our the thing that was discussed is if your child attends school, they can receive so much one-on-one help and small group help that they're not able to at home. Like, yes, they can come and get social work services and speech services, but they cannot use like the learning resource room for their testing. Um, so it was a difficult one, but it was good practice, of course, and I do absolutely respect the parents for their decision. So our last PLO, students will engage in anti-racism, diversity, equity, and inclusion in practice. My first artifact is my identity reflection. So this was also from the anti-oppressive reflective practice course. And I was just really, I guess, taken back by this. When did I write this? It's been a long time since I wrote this, and it's really embarrassing to read. But it's all real, and it's just it's definitely tough to read. I grew up in a very white neighborhood, and unfortunately, there's a bit of a cycle that I believe I've continued to break in my family, and I actually had my dad read the Color of Water, which we read in, I believe, this class, and he really enjoyed it. And I mean, obviously, that's a drop in the bucket for somebody that has these like distorted thoughts. But my point is that I've grown, and I feel as if I've tried to um, share my growth with others, because I do see that as like a responsibility. Um, my selected artifact was from my competency notebook. So this was from Halloween. On Halloween, they did a parade like around the block. The students who wanted to could participate, and their parents who wanted to would wait like outside on the grass, and we would walk on the sidewalk. Um, and I was asked to help in the categorical rooms. Um, There were, as I said, like a few children that needed help ambulating the hallways, walking through, and they specifically had to use, so the front entrance of the school is where the parade started, and some of these students had to use the back entrance because that's the only entrance that had a ramp. So we timed it perfectly so that we could use the back entrance and go all the way around and be there right before about the same time as the fourth graders, so they're buddies. Um, and we had a few kids that were very overstimulated by it was kind of loud by the noise. So we did some coping skills. And once they were more regulated, we allowed them to choose, like, would you like to go back to the room or do you want to continue? We didn't want to force them to do that. And of course, like with culture comes, you know, the whole costumes and even holidays. So it was definitely up to the parents and the the students if they wanted to participate. If they did want to participate, it was um, my hope and my responsibility to have them participate in a way that felt equal and safe and fun. And I think that I definitely achieved that. And that is it. Thank you.